Did anyone else become a participant in the social experiment known as Flat-Stanley? I went to elementary school in the mid-90s, 95 to 2001, and I was in 3rd grade when our teacher announced that we would be taking part in the Flat-Stanley project. For those of you unfamiliar with the concept, Flat-Stanley was a series of books about this flat kid who goes on all these weird adventures to famous places. New York, the Grand Canyon, France, Australia, this guy went everywhere and was like a flat version of Curious George. We started reading them in class, making them part of our English hour, and one day Mrs. Gazel told us we were going to have a contest. Today's English lesson is to create your own Flat-Stanley. It can look however you want, but the winner of the contest will get 3 prizes from the prize basket and be the class's Flat-Stanley that we send into the world to participate in the Flat-Stanley project. We were all excited. This was a chance to see our work in the pictures that would come back, not to mention get some cool stuff from the prize basket. We all drew out our own concept for Flat-Stanley and set to work coloring and designing him. My Flat-Stanley was a spy, wearing a big trench coat, a wide hat, and carrying binoculars. He wore his regular clothes under it, and he just looked so goofy that I thought I had a real chance of winning. My friend, Todd, laughed when he glanced over at it, telling me it was cool. His Flat-Stanley was a football player for the Georgia Bulldogs, his favorite team, and I thought his Stanley looked cool too. So when the class voted on the displayed Stanleys, I figured Kaylee's Flat-Stephanie would win. It had a sparkly tiara and a ball gown she had made with felt. That was the one I had voted for, at least, since we couldn't vote for our own, and if not hers, I figured Matt's would win. His Flat-Stanley was a truck driver, complete with a net hat and sleeveless t-shirt, and he had put a lot of work into it. I knew some kids thought mine was funny, but I didn't figure I stood a chance. I hadn't used any special materials or done anything really innovative, and I figured I'd hang him in my room when I got him back. So when Mrs. Gazel announced that my Flat-Stanley had won, I was shocked. I went home that night with a new super bounce ball, a pocket-sized Stretch Armstrong, and an eraser shaped like a Pikachu. I also went home to tell my mom that I had won the contest and that my Flat-Stanley would be going out to other schools and other places so we could get pictures back and see all the cool places he'd been. She said that sounded really neat, and we brainstormed where he might end up. Paris, Disneyland, the moon, we both laughed about that one. Or maybe even at an Atlanta Braves baseball game. We had a good afternoon thinking about where he might end up, and when Dad got home he joined us in our daydreaming. I went to bed that night thinking of all the cool places Stanley might go, and what we might see when he came back. Started out pretty normal. Mrs. Gazel sent the package out to a school the next town over, and they sent us back pictures a week later. Stanley had been to a volleyball game, an art museum, and finally to play put on by the class. They sent it up the road to the next school where Stanley went on a hike, went to the zoo, and then to a baseball game. It wasn't the Atlanta Brave, it was a t-ball game, but it was still neat. This went on for a couple months, Flat-Stanley traveling to Texas, New Mexico, California, Idaho, and Kansas. We hung the pictures up, sent out thank you cards, and talked about the places that Flat-Stanley had gone to. It was a good time, and we used it in our geography class to help us learn our states. It seemed that Flat-Stanley was in all our lessons that year. Math, if Flat-Stanley travels from Burbank, California to El Paso, Texas, how far has he traveled? Geography, if Flat-Stanley is at the Alamo, then where is he? And of course English, where we read the books and the letters we got out loud. It was approaching April when we came to class to find that Mrs. Gazel wasn't there. We were all pretty bummed, because Wednesdays were usually when we got our Flat-Stanley letters, and the sub told us that Mr. Gazel would talk about it when she got back. There was no Flat-Stanley that day, and when Mr. Gazel came back the following week, we moved on to something else. All the Flat-Stanley stuff had disappeared from the class, and its absence was as noticeable as our missing teacher had been. She never told what had happened, and it was a mystery talked about in hushed tones well into the 4th grade. It would probably still be a mystery if I hadn't decided a decade later to pursue teaching. I'm in my 2nd year of college now, and I've progressed into student teaching. I decided that I wanted to try my hand at being an elementary school teacher, something like 4th or 5th grade, and when they gave me the name of my mentor, I realized I knew her. It was Mrs. Gazel, my old third-grade teacher. She taught fifth grade now, her retirement coming up on the horizon, and she smiled when she realized who I was, giving me a big hug. "Welcome back. I'm glad to see you decided to take up teaching." Her classroom was in the same room her third-grade class had been in, and the kids reminded me a lot of me and my friends when we had been her students. She had a good group. They were hungry to learn, and they liked her a lot. Mrs. Gazel was the kind of teacher who kept kids' attention effortlessly, and I hoped it was a skill I would learn from her. The kiddos in her class took to me pretty quickly, and soon I was teaching classes while Mrs. Gazel just sat back and observed. Something about being in her class again made me remember my days as a third grader at this school, and that made me think about Flat Stanley again. There was nothing like that in her fifth grade class. The kids would have probably thought it was babyish, but it did rekindle some of the mystery I had felt from a decade before. I tried to find a good time to bring it up, but nothing seemed to present itself. Until Friday of my second week. I was packing up to leave when Mrs. Gazel offered to take me out for drinks. I was a little surprised, and she must have noticed because she laughed airily at my look of chagrin. "What?" she asked, her coat over one arm. "You didn't know teachers drank?" I decided to join her and found a small group of other teachers waiting for us when we arrived. Some of them I knew, most of them I didn't, but it turned out that this was a regular thing for them. They drank and talked about their week, complaining about some students who were especially difficult, and generally blew off steam. Mrs. Gazel and I sat in the corner, nodding and listening to them, and she smiled at me over the lip of her fourth glass of wine sometime near 11. "I've been sending glowing reviews to your professors," she confided. "You're one of the better student teachers I've ever worked with. I think you're probably a shoo-in to be hired at the end of your training period, and I'll recommend you to the principal myself if he doesn't extend you a position." I thanked her, sipping my second beer as I took it all in. "Hey, can I ask you something?" I said suddenly. "Neither of us is nearly drunk enough for you to offer me a ride home yet, big fella," she said, snorting into her glass. "No, nothing like that. Something's always bugged me from my time in your class, and I was wondering if you remembered the Flat Stanley project we did." Some of the color fled from her cheeks, and I could swear she shuddered a little. "I'm surprised you even remember that. It was a long time ago. Well, everything disappeared from the class so quickly, and when you came back you never brought it up again. All the books were gone from the class library, all the letters were gone, everything was missing. I think we talked about it for half of the fourth grade before something else caught our attention." She looked far away for a moment as if contemplating whether she actually wanted to answer me or not. "I think I need a little air. Would you care to escort me?" I told I would, and we left amidst a hail of catcalls about cradle robbers and cougars on the prowl. I had taken her arm and she was trying to be unbothered by it, but she was stiff and a little unsteady as we walked out onto the patio. Something had her spooked, and I didn't think it was the half-hearted teasing of her peers. When we came outside, she leaned against the railing outside the seating area, looking at the waves as they crashed against the water below us. I came to lean beside her, realizing she was trying to figure out where to begin and having trouble getting started. "Are you sure you want to know? That's a pretty messed up story, but I suppose we could count it as a part of your education. Maybe it'll help you avoid something that got me in a lot of hot water and canceled the Flat Stanley project for the whole school." I told her I did, pretty intrigued with what could have happened to make a whole school ban something as benign as a kid's art project. "Well, you remember that we sent the little guy around to a school in the next town over? Well, they sent it to another school, and that school sent it to another school, and so on and so forth. We had about the best result of any other classes, getting back twice as much material as is normal. I started integrating it into the curriculum, as you remember, and it was such a huge part of our class. I appreciated the material. Sometimes it's hard to keep kids' attention when they're that young, but Stanley really helped. Then, one day, I arrived to find that a new package had come the day before. She stopped, shivering a little as she watched the waves. Someone had sent our Flat Stanley back, and I was excited as I opened the envelope. We were starting fractions that day, at least we were supposed to, and I wanted to see if there was some way I could work fractions into the package. I would get my wish, but not in the way I wanted. I had reached into my pocket for a cigarette, and Mrs. Gazel asked if she could have one. I had never seen her smoke before, but as she inhaled that first mouthful, she closed her eyes and looked euphoric. Flat Stanley was supposed to go to Carter Wild Elementary School in Boise, but it appeared he had gone somewhere else. You're too young to remember it, but there was a pretty terrible person in the Midwest in the late 90s. He was picking up young women who were hitchhiking, and the police would find them later after he was done with them. Somehow, he got our Flat Stanley and thought it would be funny to use him to taunt the police. He had murdered 5 girls that week. Her voice broke as she said it, the tip of the cigarette jittering as she spoke, and attached pictures of them to the Stanley he sent back. They were horrific, and as I spilled them out on my desk, I recognized what I had at once. She was shaking, and as I put my jacket around her, she smiled ruefully at me. "You're a good kid," despite making me relive this. We knew that the kids in my class had all kinds of wild ideas about what had happened, but we also knew that none of you knew the truth. She took a long pull off the cigarette and let the ash dribble down. The first girl he sent pictures of was Ashley Manx. He had cut her chest open, the X going right between her breasts, and skinned her open like some kind of flower. Her face was set in the worst possible look you've ever seen, and right there in the middle of her chest was Flat Stanley. Your Flat Stanley. I thought I got it then, but Mrs. Gazel hadn't even got rolling yet. Then there was Frances Carmichael, the girl he took from the fair. She was looking for a ride, and he gave her one. He cut her arms and legs off while she was alive, burning the wounds closed with an iron so she'd bleed out slower. He finally cut her throat, and after that, he put 1 foot from that Flat Stanley in her teeth and took a picture. He was standing upright, her body on display, and her burnt nubs are something I still can't quite get out of my head. "I'm sorry," I started, but she cut me off. "No, you wanted to know, so let me get it all out. It's like the confessional I used to go to when I was little. If I get it all out, maybe it won't haunt me as bad." He got Dawn Cambridge and Betsy Cambridge next, split their backs, and made a pair of blood angels out of them. He set Flat Stanley in the middle of them, the crevice between their sides, and snapped a picture. They were still looking for them when they found Ashley. Finally, he got Melanie Fasterly, and she was probably the worst. He beat her with a sledgehammer until her bones were like glass shards. The picture he sent back was unrecognizable as a human being, and if it hadn't been for the hair, I would have never known what it was. He stood the cutout between her lumpy legs as if to save her modesty, and she honestly looked about as flat as he was if you don't count all the bone spurs sticking out of her. Mrs. Gazel's jaw was shaking, the skivering causing her to stutter over the last few words, and when she looked back at me, there was regret on her face. All the alcohol had been burned out of her, the fear having shaken it all loose as her mind remembered what had likely been the worst day of her life. I called the police, of course, but my real concern was for you guys. If the psycho had mailed this back to us, then he had the address of the school. If he knew where we were, then he could pay us a visit and make us his next photo collage, and I couldn't have lived with myself if that had happened. So I gave the police everything, and they agreed to keep an eye on the school for a while. I needn't have bothered. This twisted fuck had a particular hunting ground and a particular prey, neither of which were children in Georgia. He never did pay us a visit, but it took 6 more girls before they caught him. I didn't sleep well until they had him in custody, and I didn't sleep soundly until they slipped the needle into him last year. He was a rotten, twisted individual, and he deserved every ounce of what he got. I had to take the rest of the week to recover from his little present, and there was talk that they might want me to undergo counseling. When I got back, the school had scrapped all the Flat Stanley stuff. It was too much of a risk that some students would get a hold of it next time, and they couldn't have that. Some of the teachers thought we should tell the students, some of them thought we should tell the parents, and a few of them thought I should be fired for some reason. It was decided that we wouldn't tell any of them, and we would never speak of it again. In exchange for not causing an uproar, I got to keep my job. I thought it was a pretty fitting trade back then. So that's the whole sad story. Cure your curiosity. It did. Mrs. Gazel was right, too. They offered me a job at the end of my training, and it turned out it was her job. Mrs. Gazel retired at the end of that year, wanting to spend more time with her grandkids and her daughters. We still get drinks sometimes, and she really is a lovely woman. As for me, I noticed one major part of the contract as it was presented to me. They put it in bold so you can't possibly miss it, and so if you break it, you really only have yourself to blame. Under no circumstances will our students participate in any program that sends documents to other schools or entities without the express permission of the administration. This includes pen pal programs, Hands Across the Water, the Flat Stanley Project, and other affiliated projects there within. I signed that contract 10 years ago, and now I instruct student teachers myself. In the decade I've been teaching, I have never broken that rule, and I have Mrs. Gazel's story to thank for that. When you send something like that out into the world, you never know who might answer back and what they might have to say.